At 3:05, there's a break. At 4:10, there's another break. But other than that, we're going to be hearing a lot today from the Trash Circle. We're going to be having some presentations, and then a little bit of time for questions and comments on those presentations, followed by some breakout rooms with debrief questions, so that we can kind of discuss our reactions to what the Trash Circle is telling us about their stories. Then we take a break. We do another round of presentations, another round of questions and comments, and another round of breakout rooms. And then finally, at in the last 45 minutes, we want to allow some time for the other circles to meet, in the air circle, in the land circle, to kind of do whatever circle business you may have. That might be your reactions to the teach-in that you just heard. It might be planning your own teach-in. It might be planning some other meetings. It might be discussing whatever it is that your circle has to do. Any questions about the agenda? And big shout out and thanks to Ron and the rest of the Trash Circle for putting this all together and yeah, kind of giving us a template for the other circles teach-ins that you can use. Cool. Let's go to the presentations then if there's no other questions.
All right, everybody. So I am kicking off our Trash Circle presentation portion for today. So each one of us has a kind of a different perspective on trash and waste and how it connects with environmental justice. And hopefully, by the end of this, you'll also learn more about how the issue of trash and waste intersects with whatever you're working on in your circle, whether it be air or land. So personally, I think I mentioned this in the last meeting. Deep Green Philly is a multimedia, alternative media blog project I started back in 2011. And one thing I really like to do with Deep Green Philly is look at the history and look at like the deeper meanings. So we can go to the next slide. So for me, the trash story here in Philly doesn't start here in Philly, because the neighborhoods where most of the trash is located are neighborhoods where mostly Black and brown people live. And most of us weren't here a century ago, honestly. We came here, a lot of us came here because of the Great Migration, which was essentially one of the largest internal migrations within a country in world history. About 6 million people migrated from the South to the North between like 1900 and 1950. And of course, people were fleeing Jim Crow, they were fleeing lynchings, they were fleeing all sorts of messed up things that were going on. So what happened once they got here in Philadelphia? Once they got here in Philadelphia, they had to deal with a different kind of racism, a more institutional form, like redlining. And we can see in this redlining map that a lot of the neighborhoods where that were redlined back in the 30s, like North Philly, Southwest Philly, parts of South Philly. These are the neighborhoods in Philly that struggle the most with trash, litter, blight, crime, all sorts of things. And essentially what happened is that people were stuck in these neighborhoods. They couldn't even get a loan from the bank to fix up their house. They couldn't get equity to send their kids to school. So they were stuck in these rundown neighborhoods, and this is kind of what they look like on the bottom left right here. That's what happens to neighborhoods that were redlined. And then, trash starts piling up. City services that were once available when the city was mostly white started disappearing once the city started turning more Black and brown. That's essentially what happened. Next slide, please. So what I've heard from a lot of people, working on the trash issue here in Philly is that they feel like they are being treated like trash by the city or by institutions. They feel like they have been totally discarded and ignored and left to the side, just like a piece of trash. And I was thinking, how did this originate? But this originates within our own culture. This originates within how Black people first arrived here in this country in the first place. This image of the slave ship is really interesting because this is what kind of helped spark off the movement to end slavery, the abolitionist movement. Because people had no idea what was really going on. They knew people were arriving here, but they didn't know how how insane the conditions were, that people were being shipped over here like sardines. And I want you to one day when you get a chance, get a measuring tape and measure 2 feet and 7 inches. That's how much space people had in the bottom of the ship. So you look at this bottom, you see this bottom section of the ship on the left-hand side. They would squeeze people at the bottom of the ship, side by side, shackled together, 2 feet, 7 inches, that's how much space they had. That space would often fill with water. So many of these people would drown on the way across the ocean, and their bodies were simply tossed overboard like trash. So, and millions of people, millions and millions of people died during the Middle Passage. So there are millions of skeletons littering the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, stretching from Africa to the Americas. One of the original trash heaps of our civilization. So in the middle of, top middle, something that a lot of people don't know that happened. This was a genocide that happened in Southwest Africa, the Herero people. So the German army, German army came there. They tried to colonize this area, and these people decided to fight back. So what did the Germans do? They put these people in concentration camps. They literally, the concentration camp system that we know from World War II began with the Germans putting Africans in concentration camps in Africa and treating them literally like things. They were starved to death, beaten, worked to death, things like that. You can see how skinny they are. These are survivors that managed to survive the genocide. And the point I'm trying to make here is that this, and I'm going to read a little bit from a book that helps explain this a little bit better. This idea or this phenomenon that we have in our society today of disposability, especially of people being disposable, this goes way back in history. This goes way, way back. And we can't understand what's happening today without understanding the past, right? So what happened during World War II? The things that were set in motion in Africa and other places kind of whiplashed and hit Europe and started happening in Europe as well. And I want to read a little bit from a really interesting book. I know I have limited time. I'm going to try to keep it moving. This book is called The Cunning of History. And this is from the introduction. Rubinstein is forcing us to reinterpret the meaning of Auschwitz, especially, though not exclusively, from the standpoint of its existence as part of a continuum of slavery that has been engrafted for centuries onto the very body of Western civilization. Auschwitz was slavery in its ultimate embodiment. Rubinstein is making us understand that the origins of Auschwitz are actually embedded deeply in a cultural tradition that stretches back to the Middle Passage from the coast of Africa and beyond, to the enforced servitude in ancient Greece and Rome. Rubinstein is saying that we ignore this linkage and the existence of the sleeping virus in the bloodstream of civilization at risk of our future. And I found that last part to be interesting because now we're all trapped in our houses because of a virus that's running out of control because we're destroying nature and treating nature as disposable, treating animals as disposable, treating our ecosystems as disposable. And these things have echo effects, they have ripple effects. They don't just stay where they are, they're going to come back on us eventually, right? I'm going to have a little bit more to say about this a little bit later, but we can move on to the next slide. A little bit happier slide. So this kind of shows my own personal history of, how I have gotten involved in this trash issue through working in coalitions and joining movements, supporting grassroots efforts. This slide on the left shows, I think there was a SEPTA board meeting. We all packed in there. We were saying, no, we don't want this gas plant, but of course they went ahead and did it anyway. And that's kind of why we're here today, because we want to find alternative ways of fighting back, and, creative ways of fighting back. The picture at the bottom is from Occupy. I don't like the phrase Occupy the Hood too much, but we were trying our best at the time. On the top right, that is a picture of people who have literally been pushed to the margins of society and treated like dirt for the entire existence of this country. Native Americans. I was out there doing some Native American support work back in 2015. This is the elder I was living with, giving her great granddaughter her coming of age ceremony. They were baking a cake in the ground. It's a really interesting, interesting to see the depth of culture for people who have been totally just pushed aside and ignored. They have so much to teach us, but we're just not listening. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so what am I working on today? That's me with Councilman Squilla on the left. This is the part of our plastic bag campaign. You know, I'm out there trying to use art and creativity as a vehicle for promoting environmental justice and climate justice. On the bottom right, this is the Philadelphia Assembled Sanctuary Dome that was downtown for about a few months. Lots of interesting programming happening in there. Another social practice art project that was really interesting. Next slide, please. So what about the future? What's going on in the future? I really like this slide of me with our Trash Academy youth. I mean, it sounds cliche to say this, but the youth really are the future. We really have to make sure that they understand what's at stake. They understand what's happening. They understand the past. They understand really that their future is on the line. And we have to start fixing these problems. We're using educational tools like the toilet paper implosion. We have another one for plastic bags as well. And there's another picture with our whole Trash Academy cohort with some of these youth summer people. And I mean, I hadn't really worked with youth like that before doing Trash Academy, but I really enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I would. They really understand what's going on more than people give the credit for, definitely. Next slide. So a major thing I try to do with Deep Green Philly is challenge dominant narratives and narrative filters. And if you've done the story-based strategy, you know what I'm talking about. When I mentioned narrative filters, it's like the way that we see the world can also many times put blinders on us like a horse, and we just don't see certain things. And so, for example, this quote from Berta Cáceres talking about capitalism. And many people have a narrative filter on where they think capitalism is good and it's wonderful and it's amazing and it's the best thing that ever happened to us. It really creates wealth and it creates stability. But in reality, is that really true? Once we start looking at the details and start looking at, you know, who is benefiting from capitalism and who is suffering the most, we start seeing it's mostly white people, white men, men in general, who are benefiting from capitalism. And it is contrary to life, ecology, human beings, and women. That's just a fact. I'm sorry, we can't even argue that. On the left, on the right, someone I really appreciate a lot, Layla Abdel Rahim. And when we're talking about the cruel economy of civilization, I want you to think back to those slides with the slave ship and with the pictures of the Holocaust and whatnot. That's that cruel economy. That's what our system is built on. It's built on slavery. It's built on people being turned into objects, people being turned into things to be used by other people. And then if they're not useful, they're discarded, right? They're turned into trash. And then finally, something that we're dealing with right now, the disposability of workers. The fact that they're trying to open schools right now when they're not even trying to vaccinate the teachers. They're not trying to vaccinate the people who are cooking your food. They just want them to work. They just want them to work, to be there, to do your bidding or to do our bidding. And if they die, they die. But this dynamic is not new, right? America's first essential workers were slaves. They didn't have a choice, right? But many people today don't have a choice either, because if they don't go out to work, they're going to be out on the street. They're going to be in a homeless shelter or just on the street. So do they really have a choice? I mean, I don't know. And so when people talk about this thing about essential workers and coronavirus, we have to understand that this didn't start just recently. This has been going on for a long time as well. The disposability of people, disposability. And I really want to hammer that point home, because of course we understand what it means when trash and objects are disposable, but people are disposable in our society in a way that I don't think we often realize. All right, so the next slides that we're going to show are basically, they're more for the artist, but hopefully they'll help us understand like our own individual perspectives on the environmental crisis and environmental justice and how our work intersects with that. And I guess each circle is going to have their own way of bringing art into this, but this is kind of how I decided to do it for our group. Each person was choosing about 10 images that represent your own personal view of environmental justice as it relates to trash and waste. So for me, these images, these two images capture what's happening with our environment, the fact that something that was good and working out in the past is now something's happening. It's not really working the same way, like something's changing. Next slide, please. I love this image because it shows, like I said, the redlining juxtaposed against the city's waste and litter map. So you can see it matches up almost precisely. The neighborhoods that were disinvested in back in the 1930s, they're still struggling with all these social pathologies today. Next slide, please. This is an artist, I'm sorry, I forgot to write down his name, but he has taken classical paintings and kind of superimposed the trash issue over top of them, really in a really interesting way. I really do love these images. It really evokes the feeling of how trash makes you feel. It really just brings that up. Like it makes you tired. It makes you're just scared. You're just over it. Next slide, please. The image on the left is a reproduction of, showing, this is a picture drawn by one of our Trash Academy members who is an art teacher in Philadelphia Public Schools, showing how nature is being turned into a commodity. And that was part of our toilet paper implosion project, really interesting. On the right is our social practice art project down in Buies Park. I just really love this moment. You can see the storage container in the background and the kids just hanging out in a park that was once kind of just junky and trashy and just not a place you could really want to sit in. And I really just liked how it was transformed even temporarily into a place where people could have some community. Next slide, please. So I love graffiti, but graffiti has for a long time been considered like trash of the art world, like ghetto or something like that. Like, oh, you're just scribbling on a wall. But honestly, some of the best art you'll ever see, you'll find underneath bridges or on the side of a storage container train, in places that are not places where the fancy art people are going to go, right? But that's where a lot of the best art is, because that's where the people are. This next image, I was struggling with how to explain this, but then I remembered that I wrote a Facebook post about it some years ago, because it really means a lot to me as kind of like a catharsis moment in art. So I'm just going to read the caption associated with this image on the right with the red stuff coming out of her mouth. In 1996, a deranged stalker named Ricardo Lopez mailed an acid spraying letter bomb to the singer Bjork. Her choice to date a British rapper of African descent appears to have driven him over the edge. Shortly before he commits suicide, he curses Bjork and calls her a, quote, nigger lover. Ironically, his corpse perhaps saved Bjork's life. Blood leaking through the floor into the apartment below brought the authorities to his apartment, where they discovered 8 months of video diaries documenting his spiral into madness. British authorities were able to intercept the bomb before it reached her. Needless to say, the situation affected Bjork deeply. Years later, she made what's arguably her most iconic video, Cocoon. In it, she appears naked, just as Ricardo Lopez was when he killed himself. The red tendrils emanating from her nipples seemed to recall the last images of her stalker, who had painted his rather prominent nipples bright red in his final moments. Though the song is sweet and tender, the imagery of the video is at times macabre, chaotic, and unnerving, just like her stalker's video. And so this is a good example of how it's done. This is how you turn personal tragedy into thought-provoking art. And so for me, this represents like that internal trash, that internal waste, that shit that builds up because of trauma, that stuff that builds up because of things that have happened to you, and how you can use art to achieve catharsis and to move past these things. And I wanted to include this because, and one thing, and this is what I told my group as well, I wanted us to get personal with our art and with our images and how it connects with trash and waste. So, like was mentioned earlier, this is sort of like a template for how your group can do things, but you can choose to do whatever you want. This is just how I decided to lay out our template. And yes, that's the end of my presentation. And now we're going to go on to the next person, which is Billy, I'm pretty sure. Yep.
It is. Hey, everybody, I'm Billy. Thank you so much, Ron. That was awesome and very informative. I got a lot of notes that we had more time. I feel like we could have done some send ups. I know that we were going to try and do that, but there wasn't a lot of time. So I'm going to start with this this image of sculptures. This is a project that I did with me and my brother. I forgot to mention in our intros last week that I also have a collaborative practice with my brother, known as the Dufala Brothers. This is an old body of work that I'm kind of like I don't show and talk about very often, but in preparing for this presentation, I was looking back and I kind of looked at it with new eyes, thinking about how really it does tie into my entry point into trash, in both literally but conceptually. This is a toilet tricycle race that was kind of, it was using something. First off, it economically driven for me as an artist. I think it was my inroad. And of course, when I was like maybe 23 years old when I did this project, and I didn't have a lot of money. So buying 15 toilets to turn into these tricycles and race with a really varied demographic of racers was not necessarily economically feasible. So it was really turning to dumpsters and abandoned homes and the streets to procure a lot of the materials that would make it possible. But when I looked at it, and I thought it was maybe an exercise in celebrating something we all have in common, while still being able to distinguish our own individual relationships and differences in that something. And that, and as non-specific as that is, I think that's a driving force for me as an artist, is being able to relate and celebrate similarities, but also being able to be definitive in how they're different across many different perspectives. So this was the beginning of my journey into the world of becoming friends with salvage workers, waste handlers, scrappers, really what built a community and a network of people who I still am in touch with and continue to work with for a variety of different reasons. But also how I showed up at the current situation that I'm in. Next slide, which is rare, which is what I'll be talking a lot more about today. And rare, just to kind of give you the Rare's mission is to challenge the perception of waste culture by providing a unique platform for artists at the intersection of art and industry. And it's situated inside of a construction and demolition waste recycling company in Northeast Philadelphia. We offer artist studios and space and hands-on assistance and access to 500 tons of construction and demolition waste daily. So when I say construction and demolition waste, I'm gonna, for the rest of the presentation, call it C&D waste, just so everybody knows. C&D waste is, going back to those narrative filters that Ron was talking about, I have a very up close and personal relationship with C&D waste. But I think when it comes to recycling and it comes to trash, C&D waste is often not paid attention to as much by common folks and people in communities, because it's really kind of obscured by design. It's a residual part of construction, demolition, manufacturing, big business, big industry, and it's not at all part of the curbside domestic waste and recycling that in a lot of times in a lot of really trying topics that becomes the center of attention. So I want to try and illustrate what we do from the C&D waste perspective. So this is just a drone shot that kind of shows the Revolution Recovery is the parent company that hosts our tiny little nonprofit Rare. So you can kind of see that where it says Rare, that's where our studio is. And we bring artists into the yard during operating hours and we pool materials. Next slide. To kind of give you the 101 on construction and demolition waste, this is a illustrative, this is what it is. It's new homes, it's old homes being torn down. It is, you know, clean outs. It's a lot of different manufacturing processes that generate a lot of waste, but they have to get rid of it. So it goes into a C&D waste stream. Next slide. This is when all of that C&D waste is going to a repository or a transfer station. If it's a recycling center, this is what it would look like. And you can kind of see on the left, in the middle of the picture, there's a front end loader. It's orange, and that's pushing material from the tipping floor, which is where all that material gets dumped. All 500 tons start right there, and that's the beginning of the sorting process. And then it gets pushed into a recovery pile and into a landfill pile. And out of the 500 tons of material that come through our facility every day, 80% is diverted from landfill. That's still a lot of material that's being buried in landfill daily. So the beginning of the sort process looks like this, and you can kind of see that piece of equipment up on a little ramp and that incline at a 45-degree, that machine loads all of that material onto that incline. And you can go to the next slide. And inside of the building, you can see to the right top, it's literally that you know, 400 plus tons of recoverable materials is sorted by hand. And you can kind of see how there's bays corresponding to each worker, and they're pooling not a terribly it's not a lot of different materials, but at the bottom of the screen you can kind of see this is the bread and butter of a recycling center. You have drywall, you have ferrous, non-ferrous, steel, aluminum, stainless steel, rigid plastics, dimensional lumber, film plastics, cardboard, and rubble. It's not that exciting when it comes to its diversity, but in every, you know, demolition job, if you think of any building that's being torn down because they're going to be putting up a new loft or a new housing unit, there is some of all of that material in that demolition job. And the same goes for the new construction. So you can go to the next slide. The materials there's not too many in variety, but I wanted to use dimensional lumber just as a kind of exploding or imploding that material and explaining a little bit more. By volume, dimensional lumber is the largest material that comes through a C&D waste stream. This is an image of one of our artists in front of the dimensional lumber pile in the Delaware facility that we don't have an art program at, but we visit quite often. If you think of any kind of goods or a product that is going anywhere, it's being either freighted and then trucked, and 99.9% of the time that product or those goods are on a wooden pallet. And if you think about beyond a pallet, there's a crate. You think about all the consumer trading and everything going everywhere, supply streams, distribution, all of that, it has wood as its foundation, because that's basically what's carrying the economy back and forth in the marketplace. So just to kind of give you a little bit more of an eye on the complexity of why this is arriving, they all have different reasons for why they're showing up in the volumes that they are. And not all of them are as easily as recovered as others, but wood by far is the largest material and has a complicated history in terms of what can really be done with it. And most of the times it's just used to create ground cover and mulch. It used to be used to manufacture a biofuel, but that's also, it's not a sustainable, you know, end to what that can be used for. So you can go to the next slide. This is just an image of the pile in the yard, and this is a recovery pile. Like, this is technically, none of this is going to landfill. This is all of those materials that that show up and are separated and aggregated and then sold on the commodities market for value. And this is also where our organization comes in, and we're able to use it as you know, an educational tool, but also as a material to create art from. You can go to the next slide. Backtracking a little bit, this is the first official piece of work that was ever made at the recycling center. On the left is a dumpster coffin made entirely and very intentionally made totally out of materials that came from the waste stream, including the vessel. The dumpster itself was being decommissioned and probably would have been scrapped. And the inside of it is tailored with R32 insulation and contractor's plastic, and then piped around for the ornamentation of a coffin and its gold detail with PVC piping. And then the mandala is made with gold paint marker. On the right, I should say, this is the first piece that was ever made at Rare. And I like putting art out into the world. This is a really kind of, in a general way, kind of talking about how we value or not value or recognize culturally the impact of waste and what it means, and kind of using this as a metaphor for how we treat these things, and anthropomorphizing with the coffin aesthetic. It really can go into a lot of different, you can swim into a lot of different conversations with this. But I like the idea of when you put artwork out there like this, some of the ways that you see this kind of spin into new avenues of conversation. To pivot your attention to the right of the screen, you can see there's a dumpster coffin making an appearance in a project that we called, me and my brother were part of, called Funeral for a Home. So just to kind of reiterate, I think putting artwork out in the world is a way to invite conversation around a wide variety of topics and beliefs. And in this instance, it really snowballs into this other initiative. And Funeral for a Home kind of served as a direct response to years of widespread demolition in sections of Philadelphia in an effort to generate critical thinking and discussion around issues of housing development and preservation. So it's like, it took this really kind of wide lens on waste culture, and then narrowed it into a very, very focused project that was a much larger team. It wasn't an individual artist's voice. It became a community's engagement. And I just wanted to use that as an illustration of like how some of the things that I've been working into kind of, you know, start here and then kind of funnel, but still can then go back out again. It's important to me to see that growth and ability to be generative and create new conversations around where it starts. You never know where it's going to end up. You can go to the next slide. So to get back to what we do at the recycling center, we create opportunities for artists. And this is just a slide with kind of a lot of examples of, this is a small portion of the artists who've come through our program, but I just wanted to show some of the variety. You have an architect in the top right corner who's constructing these temporary assemblages to reflect iconic Philly architecture, using the material and the tools of the laborers from the recycling center itself. And that you can kind of see there, it's supposed to be the PMA. I know that you need to use your imagination. Things like, you know, all the way to the left in the center, there's a little unit that an artist wanted to make this portable station that allowed them to educate people on how to make soap out of waste oil from restaurants. And this was something that they could then develop and put into the back of their car and present in a wide variety of you know, neighborhoods and venues all over the city, but even regionally as well. The one that the Lily Cox Richard, you can kind of see it looks like a bunch of copper. I like this because it's an example of where you're not necessarily just working with the material. At the recycling center, one of the things we have is we have a seat at the table from an industry perspective, which is very, very unique and of incredible privilege for us to be able to talk to the owner of the recycling center to get a meeting with somebody from another business who typically, and I know this from my personal experience, if I call like a scrapper and I'm like, hey, I'm an artist, can I come into your scrapyard? They're like, no thanks, click. It's really kind of a hard thing to access when you're just coming from outside. But working from within the industry, it gives us the ability to have a referral system where you can immediately have that conversation where otherwise you'd be cold calling and getting rejected on a regular basis. So for Lily's project, she was really trying to understand how to access large amounts of copper to bale them in multiple dimensions, kind of looking at this in a narrative way as the entrails of a post-Rust Belt landscape. And for us, we wanted to help Lily gain access to a whole world of language that she didn't understand because of so much opacity between industry and, you know, common civilian life. So this is just a very small example of some of the projects that we've done. It's not just working with found materials and the trash itself. It's really looking more broadly at the waste industry, the industry partners and community partners, and how we can kind of, with as much resources we have available, see specific projects to fruition. Next slide.
Hey, Billy, sorry to cut you off here. Amazing stuff and images here in the presentation. I just do want to flag that we have cut in pretty significantly to the time that was supposed to be for questions. So I did want to see if anybody has a question either for Billy or for Ron before we go to the breakout rooms. Questions for Billy or for Ron on their presentation? It covered a lot of ground, a lot of history, a lot of contemporary stuff.
I have a question for Billy. Well, first off, Ron, hi, Billy. Ron, I really appreciated your slides. Thank you so much. I appreciate your perspective on things. Billy, so great to see your stuff from Rare. I'm thinking about this, you know, this project that we're a part of here, and thinking about those demonstrations that are meant to happen at the end of the project with the mural, and wondering if it would be possible to come into Rare and maybe build things from some of the stuff that you have there for those demonstrations.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say at this point anything's possible, right? I mean, if I have my heart of hearts is being able to, like, I should say at the core of the mission is to visualize this thing that is invisible to many people. So if I had my way, I'd pile like a 4-story tall pile of C&D waste and municipal waste on Broad Street, right? Like that's kind of the things that I think are impactful, that make people think about what they have to confront in a place where you normally don't see it. So, but to answer your question, of course, it's a possibility. And I mean, and just to kind of piggyback on that, I would be more than happy to set up a time to tour the group or individuals from the group through the recycling center, because we're still doing virtual tours. But yeah, I mean, I'm trying to figure out how to open what we do up in a variety of other ways, because we've been really kind of, let's just say, not closed door on purpose. We're just like 9 miles outside the city, and it's a dangerous site. I forgot to mention that. It's also a dangerous place to be. So access is sometimes a little bit of a trick.
Awesome.
I have a question. I think that it's fascinating to see the work, the art that you're making from discarded materials. But I have two questions. I'm wondering what happens, this is just a technical question, environmentally. What happens to all of the material that cannot be recycled that ends up there? But my bigger question is, I'm having trouble connecting the artwork to environmental justice. I feel that environmental justice has a definition. And I believe that that is the focus of this mural. or what we're trying to do is to talk struggles for environmental justice. So,
Can everyone mute their microphone? Sorry, we're getting some interference from somebody.
yeah, so I don't know what if there is a connection to environmental justice, or if this is more about, you know, pointing out that we waste a lot or have things in common. Like I I'm not
I think I totally get what you're nailing it to my biggest insecurities about being part of this group, right? I should say that, like, yeah, I didn't get to finish my presentation. Sorry, it was so long-winded. There's other special projects outside of just the artist residency that we do that, like, you know, I didn't get to talk about this whole subsect of the social sciences called discard studies, where we bring anthropologists and archaeologists to the site to do field research. It's like, I don't think that we're hitting it squarely, like right on the head, climate justice. And I was excited to be part of this group, especially to hear back from peers. And I take your question and I don't have a direct answer. I know that a lot of the subject, a lot of the content, a lot of the behavior that is tied to the programming that we do is brushing elbows, or if not directly part of climate justice initiatives. The thing that I want to learn more about is being more cognizant and pointed in where those areas lie in our programming and in our future engagement. So for me, this is kind of a crash course in seeing the world in front of me through the eyes of peers engaged in this project. But I mean, you know, my volley back to you is, beyond not seeing it, what could you read into it? Because that's really, like, in a large part, my job is to run this nonprofit. But at this point, I'm trying to cultivate a better understanding in how we directly engage with climate justice issues. So that's, and I think a little bit more of the special projects and talking about Mural, Euclid, and our relationship to a Superfund site that's being remediated just south of our site would have been able to kind of dovetail the land and the trash issues and more environmental and ecological concerns that are at the center of a lot of climate justice issues. So yeah, that, I mean, yeah, sorry, I didn't get to finish it because I do this a lot. I'm sorry.
So in response to all that, I feel like we have an opportunity as a group to, you know, process that, you know, because you're coming, at least the first part of your presentation was definitely from the perspective of the artist.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
right?
I'm an artist.
Right.
Yeah.
But this project is not about individual great artists.
No,
It's not about, but it's a merging. It's a merging of art and message, and the message is specific to environmental justice. So I think that this gives us an opportunity, I don't know if it's within the trash circle, if it's the whole group, to try to draw those links and guide the eventual mural in a direction that sticks to the topic. So I honestly don't think, well, I'll take that back. Yeah, that's all.
And that's a great, I think that's a great observation and a great segue, Lynn, too, into our breakout rooms, where we are going to be discussing, well, we have a few different question prompts. So I want to, Victoria's going to put us in breakout rooms, and there's a few different question prompts that can get us starting talking about some related issues to exactly what you're talking about, Lynn. So yeah, thanks, Victoria.
Billy, are you frozen?
Want to trade contact information, the chat box is a great place to do that. And so is the Google site. If people have links to the Google site, everybody's contact information should be up there. Yeah, I want to pass it over to, who's our Trash Academy presenter?
I am Merletta is there's a family issue with Merletta. So Merletta was holding on and just can't do it today. So I'll do my best to give her presentation. This is from the plastic bag campaign. So next slide. Trash Academy complicates the issue of trash. So trash is an entry point to environmental and climate justice. This is a character. This is the bag monster. These outfits are what they say the average American uses, 365 bags. We all know, in fact, it's much more because of packaging. Next slide. And Merletta specifically wanted to highlight the health issues, like on so many levels, that all this plastic in our world creates for us. And we know that it's dumping, litter, mental health. We know that where there's dumping and litter in our neighborhoods, there's mental health issues, there's more violence, and there's more crime rates, higher crime rates. Next slide. And Ron, if you need to say anything, please do, since I'm doing the Trash Academy presentation. So when I said Trash Academy likes to complicate the issue of trash, trash is like a symptom that we can all see and we experience in Philly. And it's kind of agreed upon, even the name Philadelphia, and it's obvious who's impacted. But we usually take that trash to like look at behind the trash. So, 17% of our floatables in the Schuylkill and the Delaware are plastic bags. We know that they break down and become microplastics, and they're in our food. They're in the deepest part of the oceans. We know that plastic, actually, I think it's right now, it's about 10% of the weight in landfills is plastic. That's a lot of plastic. We know that incineration of all this plastics causes cancer. And we know that the front face of trash is litter. So it's like these huge systems that are impacted. Next slide. And we just, we were asked last week or last time to think about our history, how things came about. And so, in 1982, there was these two biggest supermarkets switched to plastic bags, and within 10 years, they had replaced paper bags around the world. Now, paper bags are a problem too, really dirty, horrible industry, but the idea that plastic was the savior is problematic. You can see that there's, in this picture of Pennsylvania, there's thousands of fracking wells, and that the fracking is actually what they use to make the gas is what they use to make the plastic pellets that they use to make the bags. And we're an epicenter of it in Pennsylvania. And the plastic industry, which is, it's often owned by fossil fuel companies, is planning to double the production of plastic by 2050, because as we start to shift away from a extractive economy driven by fossil fuel production and use, they're looking for another market for it. Next slide. So you saw that harm comes from consumption and capitalism, and creates markets to make money. And also, this specifically is something that Merletta wanted to emphasize, is we cannot escape it. It's like our only option. It's like wrapping our stuff. It's everywhere. And so I know this slide was just extremely important to her. So I just want to emphasize that it feels really hard to resist it. Next slide. And we wanted to look at the angels, the positive characters. That's a reusable bag angel. In that one, that's a parade about clean energy, about solar and weaning ourselves from fossil fuels. And then on the right is the city council hearing to ban plastic bags. because Trash Academy organized with many, many people to help move that bill forward and to get the bill passed. So that's another victory, is when you get a bill to a, when you show up at a hearing. Next slide. And that's Merletta in the center, whose presentation I'm giving right now. And another thing that was super important to her was to talk about taking t-shirts. Trash Academy collected t-shirts from, they just put a note in that neighborhood app that people could drop off their used t-shirts, as long as they were in decent condition, at Mural Arts. And we collected well over 1,000 t-shirts. We actually had to say, stop sending them. And then Trash Academy would overprint them with a plastic bag and the thank you bag and with a no on it. And also had a game that they would play people to give away the Jeopardy, plastic bag Jeopardy, and give away the bags with the Jeopardy, with the promise that the next person would play Jeopardy with someone. And that partly came from research that shows one of the best things you can do around climate change is talk to your family and friends. And we know that this fossil fuel driven plastic bag consumption world is incredibly harmful, both environmental justice and climate. So, and just to buy the buy, I think everyone knows that every time you get that free t-shirt, it's usually a global supply chain. And of course, the fashion industry, textiles produce 30% of the world's water pollution. Pesticides to grow cotton, dyeing process. So, all this consumption that generates this trash, when you dig into consumption, it's actually destroying the planet. So we feel rich for being able to buy and get cheap things or free things, but in fact, we're impoverished from it because of our destruction of the planet. Next slide. And that is Merletta's mom, Robin, on the right, who is a clean block officer, I think they're called. I hope I got that name right. Anyone can correct me on that. And that was our campaign, like the positive side, to bring your own bag, which you'll be seeing again when it gets 6 months out on enforcement of the bag bill. Next slide. And that's the Trash Academy folks are, they speak a lot at different things and have been really involved with the climate strikes and various other, they work intersectionally because trash and plastic bags cross many different things in our environment. So they're often speakers. I think the one with the pink arrow, you can just see her standing up at the top. She's in the back of the climate strikes image, but that's one of our gifted speakers. Trash Academy folks become speakers as this thing of using trash as an entry point into environmental and climate justice. I think that's the last slide. Is there an, oh, okay, great. All right, next, sorry, thank you, next person.
Hi, everybody. My name is Ezekiel. I'm here from the Brookhaven Landfill and Action Remediation Group, which is actually located in Long Island, New York. We're here as an ally, but an ally that has to deal with the town of Brookhaven owning a landfill in a largely Black Latinx section of North Bellport, which has therefore led to health conditions dropping in this area. The landfill is located less than less than 5 miles from a school. So you can often see pictures, or if you're on the school grounds, you can see the mound that is the landfill, I should say. And we take initiatives, whether it's meeting with corporations or with the public officials, and we try to force the shutdown of this landfill. And we specifically force the change towards zero waste initiatives. This has been for too long an issue that they knew was imminently going to end at some point, but they wanted to maximize its sustainability. and they've determined that 2024 is an appropriate time to close the landfill. However, they're trying to propose plans for an Asheville site directly next door. So that's not a solution to these problems. We're trying to force some change instead of that. Can we go on to the next slide? So the landfill originally was planned to be a one-cell landfill, and over the last 50 years has grown to be 6 cells in total. As you can see here, we previously accepted all types of waste, including C and D and municipal waste. Municipal waste being what you would throw away from your house, you know, like community driven essentially. We take, it's a large landfill that takes from the region of Long Island and different parts of New York, and even from beyond. We're talking, you know, possibly from Philadelphia, possibly from Puerto Rico, over its 50-year history. So it's shifted a lot of that disposability issue onto this Black and Latinx and Indigenous community, or Long Island. You know, my community in particular idolizes a previous slave owner named William Floyd. And our land that, you know, used to be part of the Native Americans, you know, the Unkachuk people in my town specifically, and different tribes across Long Island, that, you know, this is supposed to be sacred land. And now it's being desecrated over this last half century with a large disposability and landfill promoting profit-driven waste. We can go on to the next one. So this photo on the left, I actually took. This is just a man I live right off of Sunrise Highway. So this is exit 58 that you're looking at behind you, that car being driven on the highway. But this man is less than a half mile from my house. I was on my way to the landfill, which is, there's a photo of the road outside one of the landfill's quite large. So there's, you know, lots of like little bypasses in between the highways. And this is, if you look, those are Sprite bottles that were littered just up the whole highway. It looks like a bag was dumped as if you know, fell off a truck or something maybe. And someone had neatly packaged up a lot of recycling as if it was gonna go to, you know, the state, excuse me, yeah, the state owned, excuse me, the town owned landfill. You know, they thought that they were gonna be recycling, and it ended up on the side of the road. Like, so just like this man was out picking out garbage right in front of his home, he lived on this other side of this service road. I was going out and I was picking up soda bottles, Sprite bottles off of right outside of the landfill. So this all started, as you can see on the left, with the manufacturing industry leaders like American Can Company, the Dixie Cup, and Owen Glass consorted with Cola and other massive companies in the game to push this media campaign called Keep America Beautiful, where instead of having to deal directly with their production, they tried to push the issue of disposability onto the individual. So if littering was an issue with farmers finding glass bottles in their haystacks, and the cows would munch into the haystacks and choke on the glass bottles. Now if industry producing meat is being affected, that's where littering becomes an issue in these big corporations' minds, not when it's on the side of the road like this. So they try to shift littering as in this campaign of 32 states across the US, and they shift it onto the individual, the litter bugs, And that's who they villainize instead of having to deal with how much they're producing and people throwing it away. This overflowing that really comes out, and it comes out in our landfill specifically now because we have to deal with everyone else's waste and then our own that we produce as a community. And that's something that we have to face. On to the next slide, please.
And thanks, Ezekiel. Just want to note the 2 minutes until Aminata's portion starts.
Okay, thank you. So as I was saying, it's all part of this massive corporation scheme. It's hard for us to have to deal with our own waste, and we have to go on and deal with others. And then we're just gonna, as you know, these are photos of the landfill itself outside it. On to the next slide, please. Again, this is the life expectancy for the town of Brookhaven. You can see a zoomed in portion of it, and then it across greater Long Island. Think of the Hamptons is what you would have on the right. And I was been protesting over the summer, and I was protesting with Black Lives Matter, and you know, as a movement. And there's no greater organization for Black Lives Matter. I was out there by myself for at least, I think I'd clocked at least 72 hours during the summer, where I was just out there solo. And then in addition to that, I was part of more community-oriented groups that emerged and put on protests or put on celebrations for Juneteenth. Okay, moving forward. And then that's just the photos from here. Think of the US as like, you know, allow these photos to do what they will. You can go on to the next one. So then in landfill again, you can move on. This was produced by Aaron Zipman, who's a member of Blarg. Those are, note the cars that are being driven on the body. You can go on to the next one. These are quick sketches that she made regarding the landfill and Brookhaven's really turning their back on the community in a sense. You know, nature coming back and throwing your trash monster at you, possibly. Their seagulls are hundreds of them, you know, all over the landfill. You always see them anytime you drive by. You can move on. I don't want to, you know, take up much time. Like I said, the school and the landfill in the background, that's the mound that you see. This is another art piece by Erin. Unfortunately, Erin's not here. She's a college student like myself, and she's moving in today. So we'll go to Binghamton University in New York. You can move forward. And, you know, in relation to Philadelphia, like I said, we're here as an ally. Philadelphia has its own history with landfills, and it's, again, a regional problem that gets shifted onto, you know, particular communities that have to deal with this massive overflow. Someone's asking if they would have access to, like, I guess, to look at Erin's pieces more in depth later at a later point. The next slide is Aminata, so thank you, everyone. I'm sorry I took some time.
No, you're great. You're right on time. Thank you very much. And yeah, Adriana just mentioned all the slideshows from all of the teach-ins will be posted on the Google site, which we'll send out again in the next bulletin if you don't have it already. Aminata is up next. Do we have Aminata?
Aminata was having some connection issues in the breakout rooms, so I'm not sure if she can hear us or if she's having.
Can you hear me? I can hear you all.
Ooh, yeah, we can
Yes,
hear
we
you.
can hear you.
Oh. Yes, I don't know why I'm not showing. I was showing all the time. Okay, so bitter litter, don't be a sitter. And my bitter litter, don't be a sitter comes from the platform of the 17th principle of the first National People of Color Environmental Justice Summit in October of 1991. And they had 17 principles. And with the 17th principle, which I hone in on in coming about this bitter litter, don't be a sitter, it requires that we as individuals make personal and consumer choices to consume as little of Mother Earth's resources and to produce a litter waste and produce as litter waste as possible and make the conscious decision to challenge and prioritize our lifestyles to ensure health of the natural world for present and future generations. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, and here, we're looking at the community in which I live in. Slide before that, first slide, yes. Here on your left-hand side is an actual depiction or picture. This is at 36 and Girard Avenue in West Philadelphia. And what I'm conveying here is the actual trash, litter, and blight in the community, with my desire to get the community's ears and consciousness around this. I feel, yes, I want to start with them in baby steps, not where I'm at in reference to the political side and the lobbying and the fighting for our environmental justice rights, but just first, if I can just get the community to hone in on cleaning where they live, cleaning where you do everything in your community. Yes, my platform about plastic bags and whatnot is one thing, but I'm just trying to get them, as you see the picture on the right side, there is no need for there to be this type of behavior in the community where you live. There's illegal dumping and there's people dumping. And this that you see on the right-hand side is people dumping. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, here is a slide before that. This with the tires. This is a very large lot. And as you can see, the next slide, the trash, litter, debris. Okay, here is a slide before that with the tires. Very large, the coupled with the trash, plastic bags, and tires on the right side with these tires. It can be recycled. You can use in your personal life, in your homes or outside your home. Here we have seating made out of lights, and here we have what you see in the air. We have ceiling lights made out of tires, and that is looking at how we could take some of our trash and litter can be recycled and upcycled. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Okay. I think this should, okay. And in this slide, I'm showing our present and future green environment, how eventually I'm hoping that we can get to a green environment in our communities that's zero waste. And in our behavior, it has to be a mindset. That's why we say mindful zero waste, because it has to first start with yourself in your mind as an individual. as then spilling out as a community and group, how might I eliminate some of the waste that's going into the landfill? Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. And here I am showing my lifestyle of mindful zero waste. This is all glass bottles that you see on the table. And I'm showing you from the 1950s. At that time, everything we had was glass and glass bottles. Our sodas, there's a 7-Up, our Coca-Cola, large Coca-Cola glass bottle. Then if you wanted to buy your a case of sodas, you get 6 sodas. Next, in a tin hand carrying container. Our milk and orange juice came in glass bottles. Our mothers or the women at that time, they did canning like August through October, and all of that was done by way of glass. So the future is for us to return to glass, and that would eliminate the plastic and other debris that we see in our communities. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And again, we will have questions for all the presenters from the second block at the end. You can continue to post questions and comments in the chat. And next up, we have Ciara from the Post Landfill Action Network.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm not a part of a circle, but I've been invited here to present. So my name is Ciara Williams, and I'm one of the co-executive directors with the Post Landfill Action Network. Hey, Gamar. So before joining PLAN, I was actually working at Mural Arts, and I've been involved with Trash Academy since I think like 2016. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Post Landfill Action Network. We are an organization that's committed to the zero waste movement, and specifically, we work directly with college campuses. And PLAN has a network of over 300 college campuses that we call member schools. So their administration pays an annual fee to receive different materials, direct advising, and other direct student support that is designed to educate them about the zero waste movement, and also to plan different projects and initiatives on their campus. So when thinking about this idea of zero waste, it's definitely something that started off as a white dominant space, and something that's often centered around people's purchasing power. So this organization has been has been around for 8 years, and kind of as the zero waste movement becomes more concerned with social justice, racial justice, environmental justice, I feel like that transition is definitely reflected in the organization as well. So PLAN first started off doing move out programs on college campuses. So some of y'all might be familiar with what those are. So when you think about students moving out of a campus at the end of the school year, there's a lot of waste that happens. There's a lot of things that are thrown into the trash, and more often than not, these are materials that are in fine working condition, but there's just no ability for the students to bring them with them, or no desire to do so. So it's just more complicated and often less expensive to just throw them away and then to repurchase those materials the following school year. So given this pattern of disposal at the end of the school year, a lot of different move out programs emerged to address that waste. So that's kind of where PLAN got its start. And throughout the years, our work is less focused on campus-based moved out programs and increasingly focused on this larger idea of zero waste and how it connects with environmental justice. So when we first started, we did focus more on college campuses, but now we're working more and more on the relationships between college campuses, college students, and the surrounding communities. So I feel like that relates to 3 of the projects that I'm going to highlight right here. The first project is STOP, students taking on oil and petrochemicals. That's led by one of my colleagues, Young, who is actually from the Appalachian area, which is the site of petrochemical expansion. So they're actually organizing and working with college students in close proximity to petrochemical industry. And plastic is a petrochemical. I feel like that's a connection that's often missed. So when we think about what does it look like to stop petrochemicals, it can happen at different layers. So at the individual level of reducing the usage of plastic on campuses, but also this program we call STOP is also really intentional about connecting students to grassroots organizers and organizations in those surrounding areas. So when we think about this student-led zero waste movement, it's not just the students that's in our network. We do have a network of grassroots organizations, individual organizers, and also artists. So I also chose these images because I at least find them pretty appealing. And one of the first full-time hires that Plan had was actually a graphic designer. So art is like a really big part of how we get the message out, how we create graphics and other things that are eye-catching and that make people want to be a part of the Plan network. So that's the first project. The second project is Atlas. So when we think about zero waste, I would say this idea of diversion is like kind of a dominant metric within the zero waste space. So zero waste is measured by how much material is being diverted from the landfill or incineration, either through composting, either through recycling or other efforts. So what Atlas does is Atlas is kind of expanding how we understand and measure zero waste on college campuses. So it's not just about diversion, but it's also thinking about campus infrastructure and buy-in to sustainability programs. And Atlas is a 3-stage program designed to kind of assess the state of zero waste on a campus, work with campus stakeholders to develop a zero waste plan, and then ultimately implement that plan in stage 3. And the last project, which is kind of a series of projects that I'll highlight, is so although Plan kind of started to focus on content, I would say our work now is mostly centered on student leadership and student education. So we do have a large body of manuals that kind of walk students through different sorts of projects that they can implement on their campuses. This includes establishing free stores on college campuses, move-out programs, composting and community gardens, and other efforts like that. So that's kind of like a general way that we're engaging students within the zero waste movement. And then we also have other projects that are more specific to petrochemicals and collaborating with grassroots organizations and other efforts like that. So even though we engage campuses individually, we also try to create space for campuses to engage other campuses. So we have action camps, which is kind of like 4-week-long training series that happen throughout the year. We have summits that are kind of like simulations where students can kind of practice what it looks like to build these programs on their college campuses. Next slide, please. So finally, I wanted to talk a bit about our theory of change. So our theory of change is called POI, which stands for Points of Intervention. So when we think about this idea of zero waste, it is a direct challenge of the linear consumption economy. So this graphic, the red aspect represents the linear consumption economy. So when we think about how goods are produced, it starts at the point of extraction, production, and consumption, and then ultimately to disposal. So through each of our engagements with students and each of our materials that we provide to people, we think about what the point of intervention is. And our work is advocating across different areas of this linear consumption economy. And we're supporting students to stand and collaborate with grassroots organizations in direct opposition to petrochemicals. So you can kind of see that as an act of resistance. So that's that point of intervention. We also focus our efforts on working directly with students and their campus administration to build out infrastructure programs on college campuses. So that can be surplus stores. So instead of departments kind of being in silos and just purchasing materials for one singular department, they're required to kind of go through the surplus program on campus before they're purchasing pens or t-shirts or whatever it is that they might need. So our work is pretty varied, and like I said earlier, we have over 300 different campuses spread across the United States, and we're hoping to grow our network, not just on college campuses, but also continuing to work directly with grassroots organizations. And I guess one thing I'll say too, to wrap it up, is just to talk a bit about the challenges. At least when I think about environmental justice, I think it's important to think about who's making the decisions and who is actively involved at the table. So when we think about an organization that works directly with college campuses, that's kind of a contradiction. So that's why we're pretty intentional about making sure that college students are not, and campuses are not working in isolation, but they're considering how their campus community is very much interconnected with the surrounding area, and also going far beyond that. So situating this waste stream in the global context. So it's not just the United States, it's not just the campuses, but it's thinking about how all these different areas impact each other and finding points of collaboration within that. I'm open to any questions. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sierra. Yeah, before we do questions, I have a single slide about the Green New Deal. So we heard a lot of really amazing examples of work being done at the individual level, at the grassroots level, at the neighborhood level, in communities, on Long Island, on college campuses across the country. But what's happening? I mean, I heard I think in Lynn's question and other people's question earlier, like what's really happening like at the highest levels in government, in state governments, and city governments, and federal governments. You know, a lot of folks point to the Green New Deal as kind of this model of legislation to solve all kinds of intersecting issues related to the climate crisis. As it turns out, the Green New Deal, as proposed by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Ed Markey, doesn't have a section about zero waste in it. And Representative Ilhan Omar submitted a bill that would add a Zero Waste Act into the Green New Deal. Without going too much into the details here, it basically provides several $100 million worth of funding for zero waste initiatives, infrastructure for recycling organics, recycling e-waste, and source reduction. So, you know, that's kind of at the federal level. And as I'm sure many folks know, a lot of zero waste action is happening on the city level. You know, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Seattle, all have various versions of what they call a zero waste plan. You know, in the news, you often hear about like, oh, Europe is doing great things around zero waste, but oftentimes that just means they have a lot of incinerators. And yeah, that's kind of like a very, very brief overview of what's happening on zero waste on the higher government levels. I'm sure other people on this call have more information that they could share about that kind of stuff as well. But we just wanted to add that in just because it's all in the context of many movements and a lot of organizing that's happening from top to bottom. And yeah, we do have a few minutes for questions here before we go to our second breakout room. Oh, sorry. Real quick before the questions, let's do. We actually have with us Yuri Jones, who's the artist who's going to be actually designing this mural, who wasn't on our previous call. And Yuri, do you want to take just a quick minute to introduce yourself to everybody?
So nice to be here. And I've been making murals for a long time, and they've usually been about environmental issues, but it's nice to push into environmental justice and figure out how to, you know, I'm really excited for all the ideas to percolate out of this and see what comes of it.
Awesome. Thanks, Yuri. Yuri's going to be around at the other teach-ins as well. And then there's one person, Adriana, who's part of the Mural Arts staff, who's been sending out a lot of emails. You've probably seen her name in your inbox a lot. And we wanted to give her just a chance to introduce herself to folks too, and then we'll do questions.
Hi, I'm Adriana. I sent out all the contracts. So if you see a contract, email me back. Or also Dakota's answering questions about contracts. So you can email him and he put his email somewhere in the chat. But yeah, I send out your emails. It says my name at the top, so don't be scared to message me back.
Awesome. Thanks, Adriana. Cool. Yeah. Anybody have questions for any of the speakers, for Aminata, for Sierra, other folks who presented in the second part, Ezekiel? Yeah, questions for them.
It's more of a comment about Aminata, because I know a lot of times I personally want to focus on like the systems and, you know, the corporations and how they're impacting. But I think, yeah, we do have to have a strategy for how to get people mobilized in their own neighborhoods. Because for me, it's a question of scale. Like if you have millions of people littering, I mean, that's not sustainable. And sometimes it takes years and years to get corporations to change. So in the meantime, like, what are we going to do? We can't just sit in our own filth for years while we're waiting for the corporations to change. Like we have to start doing something at the neighborhood level. So that's why I do appreciate what Aminata is working on.
Absolutely. We're all doing work on different levels, and it's all part of the same puzzle, I think. Yeah, any other questions or comments for our presenters before we go to breakouts?
Yeah, I have a question for Billy, or maybe not a question, but an observation. A lot of the waste that comes into my community and communities like mine, it is C&D waste. It's waste from contractors and waste from people who are rehabbing homes and who view the community a certain way. So they will come in and they will dump. And I think that is an environmental justice issue. There is some trash. We know our trash, but we also know when you see tubs and radiators and things of that nature, basically where they're coming from. So I think that is a way to tie in what you do, because we all, right now, during the issue of COVID, we're seeing more and more and more of it. And people don't want to pay for the dumpsters that they're supposed to have. And once a pile starts, then it just grows into a mountain. And so members of the community try to work diligently to keep those piles down. They can't always get them picked up. And that's what starts to create that mountain of garbage. So I just wanted to say that, and say that for Aminata too. But Ron, there is a way to engage the community. I think that if we could do 100% recycling, and you still have that influx of trash. You know, Pennsylvania is the #1 importer of trash. It's their #1 commodity. And that has to be dealt with on a legislative level, on an accountability level. And it has to be just seen as not being a commerce, a commodity. We have to make it be just as nasty as it is trash. So that was just my little 2 cents.
If I can, I think that's super important, because think of, you know, gentrification, and think about just the new types of technology and waste that we are producing as a society. That's, you know, in terms of my community in the landfill, we're taking the massive heaps of it, and we're still having this overflow where it's not nearly as bad as some of the photos we saw of Philly, but we're still having those problems just because it's designed to set the consumer up for failure. It shouldn't be our problem, but these corporations have turned it into, in our minds, you know, through this media campaign, they've pushed the problem onto us. And, you know, I protest, but the artists here, they show it in a different form. And it's all that same push for, we need to force these zero waste initiatives. We need to have this change. I just wanted to throw.
Awesome. Thank you, Ezekiel. Great. I'm sure folks do have other questions. You can put them in the chat, you know, as always. And I hope that everybody has at this point contact information for others if you want to do some one-on-one chats, emails, texts, whatever, off the main conversation here. But we are going to go to our second breakout rooms now, and we're going to have 12 minutes in these rooms. So we're coming back at 4:12. Right, everybody, welcome back once again. We are going to take another 5 minutes here before our final section of the agenda, which is going to be all in our content circle breakout. So we're going to break out an air circle, land circle, trash circle after this next 5-minute break. It is 4:13 now. We're going to come back at 4:18. So we'll see you in 5.
I wonder, do you think it would be valuable for us as trash circle members